Welcome to Moo 158. And today I'm going to give a report on my observations of a new reality. And that is the word that people use, reality. I have an anecdote to start. So I used to know this guy who had like this, great mind, and he went to Harvard for college. And after he graduated, he's sitting on a swing in upstate New York. I'm sitting on another swing. And I ask him about reality. And he says, well, at Harvard, we were taught that there's one reality. I said, well, it's interesting to hear because my whole life tells me that there are many realities. So then I found out that Harvard Graduate School teaches there are many realities. They actually, I think, distinguish, the undergraduates from the graduates in lots of different ways, but that might be one of them, like higher thinking. And while I do want to start with DNA today, it leads immediately to quantum thinking, which has an important role for music, but it is not the role that the quantum scientists think it is, except maybe. And the maybe is the intuition, something so difficult to describe. But with quantum, you actually can. So for DNA, and I'm not a scientist, and I don't want to like bore people about DNA. And I know there's a difference between the people who've had their own DNA done, people who don't want their own DNA done, and people who wish they could have it done. And even the people who have had it done have feelings about how personal they want to keep it versus how public they want to make it. So I would just start and say that, the infinity is supposed to be something that's tough for us finite people to understand. But with quantum, it's funny to start here because it's so nonlinear. With quantum, the energy that we have in consciousness can't die. So the death itself becomes not only a social construct, like time is in quantum a social construct, but it's also an energy, if not a field, that can't just stop. It's a big deal in physics to talk about stopping. Almost nothing stops, right? From Einstein showing the relationship of energy to mass, you already know that one doesn't disappear. The closest it's come is this discussion of black holes. And they use in physics this discussion of information. I learned a lot this week. So physics information can't be destroyed. And they're at the point now that if something did go through a black hole, which was supposed to be the only time that information would be spaghettified, and that's a term, they now think that because of, I think it's Hawking radiation, which they now feel has to be connected to what goes in it. So they go back and forth between whether it does or it doesn't. For the world of science and physicists, this is as big a deal as the issue of God, that all of a sudden, what they call classical physics is now superseded. That's a choice. That's an opinion, not mine. I mean, it isn't and it isn't. Encompassed, so that becomes one reality where the quantum and the classical is actually at the same time. Separate because we haven't figured out how they're connected. And then it's almost like an attitude, a quantum attitude. And I got the quantum attitude when I learned that Christian Forner had invented relative beat rates at the same time as he invented a well-tempered tuning and put it on organs in Central Europe, Central German-speaking cultures. And when I found out that nobody understood what that was, then I started to think, could that be quantum? And everybody, of course, would say no, because nobody had ever said yes.
Johnny, can you define what you mean by quantum, just because you're going to be using that word a lot more? What is exactly your context?
Well, before I do, I have some comments by some famous physicists about what quantum is, so I'd rather read theirs first. So let's say Niels Bohr. Hopefully these names sound familiar. Anyone who is not shocked by quantum theory has not understood a single word. Richard Feynman. It's safe to say that nobody understands quantum mechanics. John Wheeler, this is Feynman's mentor. If you are not completely confused by quantum mechanics, you do not understand it. So I start that way because the science community today, responding to me on my Facebook page talking about it, still follows those beliefs because it's still so shocking. So let's talk about what it is. My words. You could focus on a bunch of different things and then come into it by those different things. But you're asking me in general what it is. And what it is are universal rules of how physical entities relate to each other that are surprising, shocking, unexpected, provable, first predicted by math. Am I doing okay, John, so far? I mean, I'm trying to be careful. Oh, you have to unmute. You have to unmute. John, I can't hear you. Oh, yeah, Jose?
Yeah, I would say, can you hear me? Because I'm wearing a special microphone. One of the early demonstrations of quantum mechanics was the split.
Yeah, so you notice I didn't say mechanics yet. You
Yeah.
notice I'm avoiding that word yet because that becomes like a hobby, or almost like microtonalists. It's like it's a particular group that will divide things up into subsections, like wave theory is not quantum theory.
But
I think it is. Who am I to think that? But
I just mentioned that because you said that it was first postulated through mathematics, but I think one of the early experiments showed that there was something strange going on.
Okay, so I didn't say
classical physics didn't explain.
I didn't say that. So I want to make it very clear what I want to say. So let's talk about mathematics. According to quantum theory, there is only one singularity of consciousness. That consciousness doesn't come from the brain. And that consciousness makes mathematics.
I think that's a very non-standard theory. I mean, I've actually read a little bit and actually done some calculations, quantum mechanics on a low level, but consciousness doesn't really go into it. consciousness, I think, is an epiphenomenon of complicated brains. And it's
Well, this is
orders of
this.
magnitude, it's many orders of magnitude beyond the quantum level. Now, there
So
is,
so let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. So consciousness then is in this kind of thinking a uh, I keep getting this word. I keep forgetting this word. Like with autism, a spectrum. It's a spectrum.
okay.
So consciousness is going to be different for a lizard than for a monkey.
Yeah,
These are the ones that are used typically.
yeah, I would agree.
Okay, and while it used to be believed, and you may still believe this, that the brain creates consciousness,
Yes.
these physicists are all agreeing it's not the brain.
I disagree. I don't think all
I
physicists,
know, I
even the
understand that.
majority of physicists believe that.
And you focused when we spoke specifically on the cell because you said I am not going to agree that the cell is conscious,
Yeah.
though I would argue that the planet is conscious. It's a
Uh,
lower level of consciousness, but there's a certain awareness of temperature, a certain awareness, a certain planetary function, almost like the we are with the heart. There's a
uh,
certain independence of it, but it's minimal, but it's there. And then there are so many things that connect to this possibility. And I don't want to like leave them too quickly, like bring them up and then jump with them. But there's a whole bunch of them. I mean, I mentioned death. That's already one. But there's so many. So let's
But to get back to the definition of the word, because if you, the
well,
Greek,
I am, but
which has to do with quantity.
all right. So I'll use a couple of terms.
okay.
Superposition,
Mhm.
quantum entanglements, which Einstein called spooky.
Yeah.
Distance. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the person who makes a great argument for consciousness, and I've heard so many, John, you won't believe it. But the one I heard that was so interesting was this guy, Federico Fagin. And he invented the CPU. So he's not, he's done some things, and he's a physicist, and he's so emotional about it. And he says the reason he believes the consciousness is an experience he had at Lake Tahoe. Well, all of a sudden in the night, he felt, and I'm just talking about somebody's personal experience here, okay? It's not me speaking. In the night, all of a sudden, he felt what he called love. He felt a connection to the universe, something that was coming out of him, but connecting to something out of him. And then he started to question whether it was from him at all, whether he wasn't just responding. I guess he had a good time in Lake Tahoe. People treated him well. He's on vacation. He's probably had a drink or two or something else.
Yeah. Or something else. Yes.
Well, now even to something else, which we will call psychedelics, even that is brought up by physicists, or at least people who are interested in quantum, because they look at ways they call it ego death. It's like a diet, right? A small death. So ego death in this case is not permanent. It never is permanent. That's it is as close to permanent as it gets at physical death. But the ego death happens in meditation. So you don't need any psychedelics to have ego death. So with meditation, basically, by just thinking of one thing until you're thinking of nothing, go in that presentation, you get to this point where you're in touch with the universe in a special way. And I have done this myself, so I know from personal experience, there's a difference on colors, things look like a negative. There's this temptation to focus on something, but if you do, you'll break the spell. There's like so many physical things, the body feels differently. One of the interesting things as a musician is to change the energy from one part of the body to the other. It's an invisible thing that only musicians know they're doing. I use it in trills. You know, you wouldn't expect that, but when I stand up, I balance the instrument in such a way that my right hand can do like a real slap, almost like a guitar player thinks of it. And, you know, I can then get sounds nobody else gets just from my hand movements. You know, I can pour my energy from the left to the right. And I studied Tai Chi, so it's true. I learned how to do that, which also means I understand chakras in a personal way, which is why I can talk to Michael about it. So I remember when I was focusing on my navel chakra, after a couple of sessions of learning how to do this, after doing the form enough times, which is a Tai Chi shape you set up, I could make myself heavier. Other people could do it. I couldn't pick them up. I should have been able. And I also learned this incredible trick where you could I was a wrestler as well. You don't know that, but I was a wrestler. So you could put your right arm on somebody's shoulder and then ask them to take their two hands and put them on your joint. And then when you give them the point to start, they're to bend your arm at the joint. And usually they're much bigger people than me when I do this.
Yeah.
So I'm asking them to wait because what I'm going to do now is put my mind on my navel chakra.
Mhm.
And when I do that, my arm becomes stronger by far than if I was to think on holding my arm strong. If I was trying just to hold my arm strong, it would hurt. But if I do the correct focus on the chakra, no one can bend my arm. Nobody. I would have 2 people do it, 3 people do it. You know, it became a lifelong thing. You know, I remember the guy who taught it to me was one of 2 people in Manhattan who talked people off ledges of scaffolding for skyscrapers and bridges. Guy from Puerto Rico. Amazing guy. And he would even tell me, don't tell anybody how to do this unless you really know who they are and you like them. So you guys are okay. So anyway, I probably don't want to do that anymore. Now I've got other issues. But John, does that help somehow? I don't know.
Um,
But now let's talk about this. I'm going to now share screen.
Can
And
I
I'm going to
ask
show
what?
you Fagin talking about the cell having consciousness, because I don't want to be the one convincing you. And I don't even know it's possible to convince you. But the point still will be that there is a very strong conviction by this guy that it's there. And you're going to see it in his voice. It's not mathematics. It's not on paper. Somebody want to ask me something? Go ahead, Jose.
Fine, I'm fine.
Oh, okay, because I'm going to find it first. Oh,
Chris
I
had
have it.
something he wanted to ask, so he put it in the chat. Chris did.
Go ahead, Chris. I can't read the chat from here.
Yeah,
That's
I
my
just
big.
wanted to say that what I've read is that quite a few people consider consciousness as being in what's called an emergent phenomenon coming from like string theory, quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, and I want to tell you that I had a theory before that I've discarded of Julian Jaynes and the bicameral mind, where consciousness happens only because the left and right hemispheres are connected by a corpus callosum. And I was interested in that since Sperry got the Nobel Prize for epilepsy cure, basically because you cut the corpus callosum and the two hemispheres of the brain work fine with each other. There's almost no difference in the person. So Julian Jaynes was this great, doctor of this in Princeton, and I talked to him on the phone. I set up a couple of concerts, in fact, based on his theories, origin of consciousness and the breakdown of the bicameral mind. But that still just means we're connecting to this outside singularity of consciousness. So with that in mind, I'm going to now share Federico Fagin.
We see the proteins, we have the DNA, we have all the action going on in a cell, which is tremendously complex. Yep. But we think we can reduce it to first principles because we know what those molecules do to each other, and then it's just a rule of large numbers, which will give us sort of the action of the cell and will build up to the organism. Yeah. But you're saying that on that level, quantum effects are playing a role which make action within the cell indeterministic and even a free will decision?
Absolutely, but the free will decision is not in the cell, it's in the fields that control the cell.
Yeah.
See, I was mentioning before, right, that a particle, like an electron, doesn't exist separate from the fields. It's a state of the field. From physics point of view, ontology is in the field, is not in the particles, because the particles, are integral to the field, so they come and they go. If a particle existed, it wouldn't disappear, right? But an electron can appear and disappear. But it is a state of a field that appears or disappears. There is nothing more. There is no particle. But physicists, the particle physicists, but I see the particles. No, you don't see the particles. You see the effect of the states of the field on this classical world. And then you see something, but that is not a particle. That is the effect of something that was amplified a huge number of times to give you what you call a particle. Mm.
The trade war with China isn't ruining your life as much as waking up 3 times.
This
I love that. I love that.
becomes a problem for me, unless I get some kind of license with YouTube. Or Vittold's here, and he's in Greece, so he's not able to help.
You can use the DuckDuckGo browser, and you can automatically bypass commercials. So
all right, so we have to talk about that, Michael, and make that happen. But this was about enough is what I wanted anyway, and I knew that. So that's why I took the risk, and that's why we could stop there, and it's fine. And you see his sense of it as a field, and this superposition of is almost a superposition of. No one says this, but it seems like particle and wave are almost superposition. It's like this. They say classical physics, it's 1 and 0, but and those are bits for computers. And this is the guy who invented them. So okay, and then you got qubits, and they're based on quantum. That's a Q from quantum, qubits. And the difference is that instead of 1 and 0, you have 1 and 0 at the same time. So you also have 1 and 1, and you have 0 and 0, and you have 0 and 1. And this is a different take on connections between things. And then you keep adding the qubits. They only let you use an IBM quantum computer in upstate New York, I think it is, by the internet. So the use of these things are going to be on the internet. These quantum computers, which look like giant squids, with like these big tentacles pouring down.
Yeah.
And they have to be at a very cold temperature.
Absolute zero, which again is going to destroy the planet.
Stop bringing in these nonsensical outside
It's a
things.
fact. I got two kids, and I don't want the planet's
I
Earth.
hear you. I hear you. Anyway, anyway, this idea of music and quantum is going to be the next thing to really chat about. But I just want to say on the DNA thing, so you got DNA, basically in every cell. That means
Red blood cells.
every cell knows what's in the rest of the body.
Mm.
No?
No,
I know that
red blood cells don't have a nucleus. In
but what it is
mammals.
each DNA,
No,
you can find an exception. You can find an exception. But
Okay.
each DNA is going to also shut off. It doesn't need everything for each cell because the cells have purposes. So of course that's true, but that's why it's not in the cell, the consciousness, but in the wave of all of those cells together.
No. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm not going to try to convince you, and we need to move on. But the thing that I want to say about DNA is, when you get to the final analysis, there's three kinds of categories. There's 1/3 of the population, which is Han Chinese, and they are not particularly focused on music. I studied Chinese music with Cho Wen-chung at Columbia for a long time. We were good friends. We used to hang out. He was the Varese specialist as well, and he introduced China to the Western world, when Mao had already destroyed all the violins. Put all the musicians in concentration camps to break rocks. But, the Qin, which was like, all the scientists would put the Qins up on their walls. They didn't play them. And then it was arranged that all the Qin masters, and this is like a zither, multi-stringed instrument, they would have like a certain time on the radio. And that was their career. There is no place in China, and I've been to China, at least Beijing and Shenyang, which is another very large city that was the capital of the Manchu, that has its own forbidden kingdom. So they moved from there to Beijing. And it's the Manchu that put China together. And the Manchu are an ethnic group, so they have a DNA distinction, and this group is now spread out of all China. So there aren't that many in Xinjiang, but there are some cities that you could visit that are more Manchu than others. So, I did the best I could. I went to an all Manchu restaurant, saw a Manchu hotel. The Manchu restaurant was all lamb. Every part of the meal was lamb. The dessert was lamb. The salad was lamb. You couldn't believe how much lamb. And I'm part Greek. I thought lamb was a very Greek thing. But then here I realized Manchu, wow. And I've met some Manchu. My wife had a friend who was Manchu who came and visited us in San Francisco. And, I could talk to them. They're the ones that had the buns in their hair, which were like pillows, so that they could sleep at night anywhere. And they had all their instruments to be played on horses because they were always on the horse. And so this is like a way you can look at DNA and music. But if you look at the fact that 95% of China is Han, and the Chinese are all over the world besides, it's like 1/3 of the planet. They're not using music without words. They're not necessarily having individual composers. I would argue that the musicians who are Chinese that we all know are all the ones who left, because there's nobody there that understands them. There's a couple of towns that have Western music. You might hear pop tunes from a flute player in school, You could go to the park and you could see some Tai Chi and some dancing and maybe some music making. Or you might catch some military music, which is probably the best I heard. Military makes music. So the theme of the whole country was created by 3 composers together. That's their national anthem. So China, as 1/3 of the planet, from a DNA perspective, is highly mutated. They have like multiple mutations. You compare that to Tibetans and Mongolia, they have very, very few. I mean, a huge difference right there. Another 1/3 of the planet, really, it's about a 1/3, maybe a little less, but pretty close and growing, is India. And India has a very, at least traditionally, a focused understanding of music, but in such an insular way that it's not easily shared by other cultures. We actually mentioned on the first session this year that we could easily have a Saturday every week devoted to something from Indian music because it's that complex and that original, that provocative, that informative. And the rest of the world, because India doesn't have composers either. There are no composers from what the Indian musicians have been telling me. They don't see themselves as composers. They do composition, they do improvisation, they play different kinds of instruments in different parts. They have different collections of ragas. Ragas are not scales, ragas are melodies. So that already knocks out all of what we focus on when we focus on harmony. All the originality is coming from how should we put it? Variety. There's such a variety of DNA of the last 1/3. The most variety of DNA on the planet is the Caucasians, the so-called Bushmen of South Africa.
Yeah.
And they have a DNA of haplogroup Y, which is called Caucasian A. Y-DNA A. So they have the most variety. And there aren't so many left, and they are not doing well, as Michael would put it. You know, they're kicked off their land, and they're in several countries, but they used to be all over. They got pushed kind of down into like the worst territories. And then the B DNA are like the Twa in Central Africa, you know, often called pygmy. And, you know, they may have smaller stature, but they also come from jungles. They've been relegated to jungles. And when you're covered by a canopy of trees, you don't get tall. So that you could get like better food and, you know, they may not be as short, but they are probably the origin of the Negrito, which is an Asian ethnic group. And the Negrito are in Malaysia. They are the Eta of the Philippines. So they're the first people to settle the Philippines 60 to 80,000 years ago. But, you know, how could you talk about DNA without mentioning the Denisovans? And most people don't even know who they are today. That's why, Michael, you know, I don't want to go about today right now because they don't even know who the Denisovans are. And, you know, we're all Neanderthal. We already came to that reconciliation. But if you were Asian, you likely were Denisovan. And Denisovans continue to be found, not much of their skeleton, but parts. And then there's other groups. So now the whole Homo sapien thing is we are different groups that intermixed.
Yeah.
We call them archaic humans, but these are like different hominins that intermixed, and we're like a resultant of all of it put together. So we're not a tree, we're a bush. I heard that years ago, but I couldn't contemplate what that meant. That's quantum, that bush. That means everything is actually connected. So we get back to superposition and music. John might call these a metaphor, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, I would. I would.
like it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's all metaphor.
Well, I didn't say it was all metaphor, but I
No,
like
it's
that
not
you
mostly.
consider it metaphor.
But I mean, the way you're using the terms is metaphorical.
I hear you.
Yeah,
I'm
physical.
showing you that I'm on your page, that I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, we're not too much disagreement.
Right. So, if you're going to call consciousness a singularity, that would make it completely different than, received wisdom. If you're going to say 1 and 0 happen at the same time, you're going to go against received wisdom. If you're going to say there's a quantum entanglement, that one particle is connected to another particle millions of miles away, well, that calls for you have to shake things up and see where they settle in a way. I mean, the scientist says you have to be prepared to be wrong. I don't think the musician is as happy about that. But at the same time, the composer, who calls himself experimental to the degree it is setting up something with the proposition that it could fail, or at least stochastically. However, it wasn't what you expected, it might be better.
Yeah.
And that's Xenakis who makes that clear. And he probably has equations for it. He knows the math. He was an architect. He was somebody very much. Now, when I think of quantum in music, I actually think of a piece I wrote called Taliban Buddhas, which you've seen. And it's not written on paper. I don't think it can be written on paper. One of the things that you find out about quantum is you cannot copy it. It doesn't clone. So the quantum computer will never replace this one we have. It speeds things up is the way they look at it. It's all about speed. So it's not that it can cure cancer because it's more connected to the cells, which it might. It's not that it could open up all the passwords for protection in all these different institutions, which it could.
Yeah.
But they're only at the tip of that. With quantum computing. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, but what they're saying is 4 to 5 years, they're going to hit the scene and cause more inequality and destruction than we can even imagine. So
yeah.
We're at the beginning.
Well, unless you're, one astrophysicist doesn't believe that we'll ever give up to it. So, but one thing often we get AI as like overwhelmingly all that we're talking about, but it is not what we're talking about. Michael and I have discussed this, and we agree that making Chopin again doesn't help anything. And there are even some physicists who know that there's no value, right, in copying the styles of others.
Yeah.
Right? So what's missing is the originality. What's missing is that impulse to create, that the computer doesn't have. So don't look for the computer to, all they have now is to throw out random numbers. So Jim Harley has come up with he's part of a book that I'm going to show it to you. Hold on one second. So this is the book, Quantum Computer Music, Foundations, Methods, Advanced Concepts. I think I put it in the chat. It's $219.99. But it's not going to offer you that much. For example, I think I can move this, and let's see. This is the fellow who wrote the book. I'm just going to call him Eduardo for now. And let's hear what he has to say.
Now, all this has evolved. That's 60 years ago. And what we have improved with the time is the speed of the computers. Computers, the 7090 IBM, and then later on they started to have the next, and then they came the normal PCs and the Apple computer. And nowadays, what we are still doing is improving the speed of the computers. Quantum is a way of increasing still more the speed. Now, what do the computers really do is they churn out numbers. And these numbers, theoretically, and what we did once with a small Rockwell IM65, is to transform mathematical formulas into a program which then churned out the numbers. And the numbers were pitches. And that's what the computer can give, is pitches. And these pitches we had to transform into a synthesizer in order to get the timbres. But the problem again is always you get a series of pitches, goes through timbres, you get a regular timbre, and then you had to create several layers in order to get a composition, what we call the composition. Now,
so what they do is convert it every time to equal temperament.
Yeah.
Every single musician, every single physicist, and
Brilliant.
and you know, it clearly, if there's anything that would seem to be a social construct, it would be equal temperament. And yet, when I discovered the relative beat rates with Witold, we found that for equal temperament on 12 notes, though I have a feeling it would work for more than 12, Neidhart, Johann Georg Neidhart, I think is his name, I hope it is. I always call him Neidhart. He's the guy who in 1706 made that famous duel with his teacher, who was, you know, a cousin of Johann Sebastian Bach, actually a little older, and the son of his uncle that he was, you know, studying with, at least until he left at the age of 10, left Eisenach. But there was no interest in 12 equal. He lost the duel. You know, it turned out that there was no aesthetic interest because the people of Thuringia, of the Anhalt-Saxon region, didn't like it. You know, we can say when it came, but now let me say when it started, because what Neidhart wrote was 1-1-1-1-1-1-1-1-1-1-1-1-1-1-1-1. So I decided to call Witold and ask him, why is it all positive ones? And this is to me quantum. It works in both directions at the same time, everything connected to everything, its own universe. That's what it is. You don't listen to it, as I've tried to tell John. No one hears it. It's all mathematical, linear equations. That's it. You cannot hear it. It's not based on a pitch, not based on a range. It's something that nobody's paid attention to before. But the guy who invented it invented well-tempered tuning in 1665. And that's now published in a book as of June 1st, if everything goes well. Now, I said to Vittel, what if it was, why is it positive 1? All the fifths are flat. How could it be that positive 1, 12 times, in relative beat rates, gives equal temperament? And that's all Reinhard said, though he also gave relative beat rates for different tunings and also using different intervals, including major and minor thirds. The major third, though, was the diminished fourth because he was thinking Pythagorean. Everything he was thinking is spiral fifths. So equal temperament comes out of that as far as Reinhard's concerned. So I said, what if it was negative 1, 12 times? Guess what? Same result. That seems quantum to me almost. But okay, I don't want to say anything's quantum that nobody else said. But what if we change the number to 2,312? 12 times. Vittel did it. He went to Scala. He put that in 12 times. I waited. 12 to an equal temperament. Kind of imagine would work for any interval. That the equal temperament would come out to be any number. A physicist would say n, right? Any number that's repeated. But of course, Reinhard realized it too. He inherited this.
Are you talking about a cycling back?
Yeah.
In other words, you're going minus 1, 1, 1, 1 or plus 1, 1, 1. It's still kind of like a Pythagorean operation, isn't it? Right? Where you're aggregating multiples. Because I remember Emil Richards telling me what he loved about 31 was that you could take the major third and do a chain of them 30 times and you come back to where you started. And I remember saying that to Herb. He said, that's true with any ET that's a prime number. So 17, you can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can't really fathom outside of 12 in this case because that's where the technology is. So like with quantum, I need to prove things. So I'm using Scala to prove what happens with
I would
fifths.
suggest running the numbers through Scala, like with any prime number ET, and see if it cycles back the same way.
It doesn't have that available. It only had the template for 12.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, you can do it in Marcus Hobbs' software.
I was hoping he'd be here today.
Yeah,
Any prime number ET will always cycle back to itself.
right.
It's the
Right.
ones that aren't prime that have
Right.
like in tuning theory we call them
But
byte chains.
here we're talking quantum. And from this perspective, if the numbers were any numbers that were repeated 12 times and they were vibrating, in other words, it would have to beat that number. It'd have to like beat -1, beat -2, whatever you wrote. That's the beating. The fifth now is making that beating in that direction at simultaneously with all the other fifths. And so that led me to believe that mathematics, no, scratch that, that equal temperament, 12 equal, was discovered rather than invented. Because anybody who's working with it, and there were these engineers that would work with it the way an accountant does your taxes. You would go to the engineer if you're building an organ to, basically tell me what the relative beat rates were, because Christian Forner laid it out. Now, he didn't do it himself that we know of, because his stuff was destroyed by Werkmeister. But we know that his great-nephew, Johann Caspar Trust Jr., did it with thirds, not fifths, just thirds. So they started with thirds. So thirds will work. We just don't know how. So I'm just taking it from what we can prove, and we can prove with fifths that equal temperament just seems to be that anybody working with relative beat rates would calculate, they try it out, they discover what would happen if. And so equal temperament would be known, not necessarily, as John, as you put it, by looking at the frets on a guitar, because they're not equal. The frets on a guitar are close to looking equal artistically, but they're not equal.
Oh, I mean, the distance between them. Well, of course, they're not equal.
No, as they go up the neck, they get closer and closer together, but the scale doesn't change.
But
So that put a little flaw in what you had said, but at the same time, I did agree with you that it was discovered. So, that might have like inclined them towards looking into it. That's possible.
Can I propose that maybe in this question of discovery versus invention, that it's also a spectrum? Because if you take something like fractal geometry and you apply it to graphics, is that a discovery or an invention? Because as a result, you can create all this new artwork that never existed, but it's based on the discovery.
Right.
You take this and plug it in over there.
Okay, so two things.
Which is that?
Two things. First is you're being visual, and that's a whole category by itself.
Right.
It's really more legit actually, because the
What I'm
experiments with
proposing is-
photon
Yeah. Mhm.
really is what set up in motion the whole quantum thing. It all started visual.
it's just
So, like the hologram, lasers, everything is started visual. The fact that the eye receives photons coming as little packages, meaning quantized.
Right.
So
And the fact that
quantity.
that a
coming from
photon
quantity.
can be absorbed by an atom.
yeah.
What happens to the photon then? It goes away, but it doesn't.
It doesn't ever disappear.
Anyway.
But
Yeah.
that's another issue about
Oh.
whether the information is actually destroyed or not. See, they're going to argue it's not. The quantum view is it's not. But now let's take equal temperament off the page, and let's use something else. And I don't think this is metaphor. So 128 tuning reflects quantized relationships between the notes of the harmonics.
As would any just array, right? If that's super particular, right?
Right? And this is, if we invert it to a different dimension, we get the undertone series.
What do you mean by different dimension?
Well, it's not the same thing, and it proceeds in the opposite direction. It's almost like the past.
I'm sorry, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about the undertone series compared to the overtone series.
Yeah, I know the difference, yes.
Which is not known, at least so far as I can tell, by anybody who's talking about quantum in the science world. They don't know anything about it. If you use superposition, the fundamental, if not the second harmonic, is going to contain in a quantum relationship, in a superposition, if not a quantum entanglement, it's going to contain other harmonics. Those relationships are, if you affect one, it affects the other. If I have to force myself into 12 equal again as a social construct, it's really easy to say a major third and a minor sixth are quantum entangled. Whatever you do to one affects the other. And it's a big part of mean tone.
Yeah.
All you have, let's face it, mean tone, you only have to deal with 6 notes. You deal with those 6 notes, it already affects the other 6. So mean tone is really a 6-note issue, from that perspective. And equal temperament is a mean tone.
Yes.
Mhm.
Right? And so we just keep going on and on with words, and words can be very interesting because words, first of all, it's not the first way that musicians behave. I tend to be a very verbal person. I admit it, but I also recognize not all musicians are as verbal as I am. I'm not saying it's a contest. It's probably DNA, on some level. But just because something's difficult to put in words doesn't mean it's not there. Just because we don't have the answer to a question doesn't mean the answer is not available. But if we don't ask the right questions, it's really hard to get the right answers unless you get them by accident. But there is no accident
Sometimes
if
you get the
everything's
answer first.
tangled. Maybe that's what the musicians do. They get the answers first. Because, there is certain, and again, it could be like more metaphor, but there's certain behaviors we have as musicians that fit within these quantum ideas. So the idea that the music is always going on, something I talked to George about once. Music's always going on, and we enter our conveyor belt, we just step on at the right moment to start our contribution. Now, by doing that, and that's not just me and George, right? That's kind of, I hesitate to say universal, but this is the way musicians tend to think. Now, let's apply that to quantum. In a way, it creates a past. We are creating a past for that present that's musical in our heads. And it's also reflective of another quantum idea, which is multiple dimensions, which I'm still not clear about how that connects to multiple universes. From a multiple universe idea, that's basically, did the Big Bang happen more than once? What happened before the Big Bang?
Yeah.
And in Indian culture, I found very interesting this concept of akasha, which is really like one of two things. The second being everything we know. Akasha being the equivalent in Hindu culture, history of kind of the space of the universe.
Well, that reminds me of information is never destroyed concept also at the event horizon of a black hole.
Right. I also found it very interesting that people love talking about black holes. I once was a high school math teacher at a very advanced Manhattan school, and I had such fun having the kids debate what would happen when the two black holes, collided. And these guys just went off. They just loved it,
Yeah, you get a bigger black hole. I mean, we're seeing it happen.
But the adults in the room, they're saying it doesn't suck anything in. So you have to fall within that, area where you're heading towards it. So they keep coming up with new stuff every day. I mean, it's almost a wonderful distraction for what Michael keeps bringing up, the real world. And by the way, when I mentioned reality before, if I didn't make it clear, I would like to see reality contain quantum physics so that it's not one or the other, or that they're at odds with each other. And this is part of the issue. John says, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a this, I'm a that. And like we talked about philosophy, physicists don't have a very good view of philosophy because they don't feel philosophers have taken their liberal ability to think and focus it on these new realizations. And these realizations to me are much more important to the musician than equal temperament, variations. And they just call everything that's done avant-garde. And it took me a while to figure out where they were coming from. And what that means is if you're an equal temperament, now you want to be quantum. So now you're going to start doing glissandi, explosions, everything that's going to sound weird. And the funny thing is they use the word weird so positively, right? For Einstein to start it off by calling it spooky. I mean, look, physicists found this relationship between one thing and another. The electrons do not have orbits around the nucleus. The nucleus is much tinier than we thought it was. Most recently at CERN, they discovered, and the only reason they discovered this because it happened before. The only reason they discovered this is because they planned to discover it. So it means you have to create, you have to direct, you have to have the right question. So they found that they could take lead, and with the super collider, they can take lead and remove 3 protons, and then it turned into gold.
Alchemy. Mhm.
Well, alchemy is what we think of,
Yeah.
but alchemy could be now here we have the word subconscious, right? If conscious is what we say, then subconscious is our connecting to it without realizing it. So alchemy could be like that. There could be all kinds of things like that, including religion. So, this whole concept of everything being connected was hippies, New York, 1970s. I'm one with the universe. You know how many times I heard that? And then to find out, wait, it might be true. So I called John Cattler. I say, John, have you ever thought of quantum? He says, oh, yeah, for 40 years. He's in contact with Kaku, the famous quantum physicist. He wrote pieces where the titles are clearly quantum hyperspace. He wrote evolution. He says his whole way to the Fibonacci series was from quantum understandings. He agrees with superposition. In the harmonic series, the minor third and the major third happen at the same time. In equal temperament, they don't. So if you use equal temperament, you get the wrong answers. Really, it sounded like Eduardo was talking about the lumitone. So you get all the numbers coming out from the quantum computer, and then you force them into equal temperament. Which one is closer to equal temperament?
Yeah.
They had this whole, I think it was 3 to 4 days, called quantum music. So they had this CERN scientist, who was not a physicist, journalist, come out and ask, what's quantum music? So she's asking Eduardo, she's asking the woman on the side who is an artist, painter. And then everybody in the audience starts to talk, and I wade through these hours of this. And at the end, there's no such a thing as quantum music.
Yeah, nobody knows shit.
Right. Nobody knows shit.
Can I just this is an interesting subject, and it goes in so many directions. I'm biting
Thank
my
you, because
tongue
it's
to
not linear. That's the big thing. That's why it's so challenging. Go ahead.
I'm biting my tongue to avoid this, going on tangents. But quantum in this context fits in 2 areas for me. One is that we're aware of the quantum nature of the universe, and so it then becomes a subject for creation or invention, artistic invention. So that's what I'm hearing composers are doing. But then I'm also aware of the fact that if the universe is quantum, everything we do is quantum,
That's right.
no matter what we do,
Thank you.
right? And there are physicists and biologists that are working on that interface between quantum and the classical world,
Yeah.
you know, and we can't avoid it. That's just the way the world is, or the universe, the cosmos is. You know, we're embedded in it. That's all.
Right.
Even our consciousness.
If we observe something, we actually change it. That's quantum. If we take literally the equivalent of a micro photograph, we're stopping something that's only looking to us in the classical world like a particle. Time has been a social construct because past and the future is happening in the present for us. Mathematically, there has to be life on the planets. There are, let's talk some numbers. Universe 13.8 billion years old.
Yes.
Yeah. So after 1/3 of the time after the Big Bang, that's when life starts. The chance for life, considering there's billions of galaxies that have billions of stars that have planets, is between 0 and 1. But once you get past 1, and so if infinity means things have always happened, always been, and we can't contemplate it, and even contemplation is a form of thinking. Thinking is quantized. You're going from one thought to another, and there's no real linear connection. Things pop in your head. So to accept it, reorient yourself, this is going to be how we deal with it, I think, in music. The spiral of fifths is a quantized unit that is repeated in an algorithm. Might be the way we should think of it. In both directions. Meaning it has the past and the future is the same. They're metaphors, John, but they're also truths.
And they're workable. You can make shit with them.
Yeah.
In our case.
Yeah.
In our field.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I have an example of something I wanted to show you. It's a journalistic article from Canada that's, she's not the most brilliant necessarily, quantum physicist, but quantum mechanics person, but she's trying to find she's throwing out, the rope of the ship into the ocean, trying to, throw you some way to save yourself. What can we do with the musician? And I wanted to show you that because
make them ignore and ignore them.
Well, it's not just what we do; it's what people see of us, and they don't see the microtonal world at all. And I have to say, what could be more quantum than microtonal? And it seems so obvious to me, but clearly it's not obvious to everybody.
Well, but it does go well with what was the guy's name? Federico, who talked about field?
Fagin.
Fagin. Okay. I like what he said in that is microtonality. It's a pitch field, an infinite pitch field.
Yeah.
And you're pulling, if you think of it almost as a wave function that's kind of undefined, as soon as you say, I'm going to work in 43 ET, you've collapsed the wave function for that passage or for that period of music. Now you're working in something solid, but you've actually, you can think of it as embracing the entire pitch field. And you continuously, the process of composition can be the continuous collapse and uncollapse of the wave function. What do you think, John?
I think it's a good metaphor. No,
That's
seriously.
all we got, by the way.
You make the decision. You're going to quantize to 12. You're going to quantize to 43, or 53, or 31, etc.
Can I expand?
Are you quantizing, or it's already quantized?
I think you're making a choice to quantize it.
Okay.
I mean, I think
or any other operation.
Yeah, I have to say I didn't really hear that because I had to focus on this last thing. This is the dangers of trying to do the whole show yourself. So I'll have to hear that in a recording.
I'm
But
talking about embracing the entire pitch field and then collapsing the wave function when you decide.
Yeah, that's what we're doing, right? It's harmonic series is infinite.
Yeah.
Whether we hear it at a certain point or not is the question, maybe.
Yeah, I like this use of the word collapsing. I would apply it to scale, any scale.
Yeah,
you're collapsing. The whole infinite frequency spectrum is collapsed.
That's right. Yeah. For that period of time that you're using it. Yeah.
Okay.
But the rest of it continues to exist.
right.
That's the.
Yeah, I just think that what we're really saying, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is we can use our microtonal tunings as tools and ways to make these quantum ideas clear. I'm thinking of Lou Harrison telling me one day about a pizza being brought into the second grade to teach them arithmetic and to teach harmonic relationships that way.
Great idea.
You know? So, in that sense, I thought, okay, let's now go to what are they saying about us? Okay, what are they saying about musicians? Okay, so hold on, let me share that. So first they have a big discussion about whether beauty has a place and what is beauty. And, they believe basically that it's only about beauty and musicians only care about beauty. And, I have trouble with almost all the words. Like, for example, what if dissonance yields better insights? For Stravinsky, Schoenberg, Cowell, Ives, all 12 notes are consonant. So, I know that there's entropy issues with Paul and dissonance measurements and stuff like that, but it's becoming a dated concept based on culture.
I have a big problem with the idea that music is all about beauty because it's not, I mean, we all know many composers want to express ugliness.
Sometimes.
Or feelings that aren't obvious. Beauty is obvious.
Right, exactly. I mean,
what we would say is we want to have truth. And sometimes the truth is ugly.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't understand.
And sometimes ugly can be a perfect fifth.
Yeah, that's right.
Or a major third. I've heard the 5/4 called ugly in France several times. Especially in France for some reason. So here they have Pythagoras, inventing anything. A guy who never wrote anything down. Pythagorean tuning was Sumerian, then Babylonian. It's Chinese, it's Celtic, it's so many things. It's Middle Ages. It has very little to do with Pythagoras, if anything. And, the famous dropping of the solids to see which one gets to the ground faster, he was wrong about it. He thought that weight had something to do with it, but it's actually, later physics shows they actually arrive at the same time. So picking Pythagoras just seems to be like, it's a bad start. Beauty is the next one that's bad. And then they start talking about imitating other composers, which of course we know is fruitless. Here they go, notions of beauty. Of course, it's all on 440, as if that's natural. You know. And then, when they pick two notes, the notes that I found used the most often are C and A sharp. Here it is. Look at this. A sharp.
Wow.
Like, this is important. Then they have Vincenzo Galilei as the beginning of equal temperament, which, again, it's not accurate. He's the beginning of using the 17th harmonic to get, 99-cent intervals. Then using the word ugly dissonant intervals. I sometimes think they're talking about the wolf, but not necessarily in terms of Galilei. And certainly not Bach and Mozart. So that's just the person talking. What they're talking about a lot is taste, and they don't realize it. So they're all discussing music by their own taste. Eduardo's taste becomes clear when he starts talking about how contemporary music dies in the 90s and the 80s, and nobody likes it anymore, and he doesn't understand the power of opera. And then the art historian basically says, oh, I understand the opera. They're presenting old operas of the 19 and 1800s with the modern politics of the present. And of course then he goes on about how he doesn't understand improvisation. And she says again, I disagree with you, because improvisation has an audience because it's about the here and now. And that is what the people are relating to. And of course, that's very quantum, because we just said, if time is a social construct, it's a joke by Einstein that it's the watch reading, a certain time. It was a joke because it's not, and this is actually true. I can't believe it's true, but in 1979, I took a black marker, and I wrote on a tent flap in a summer camp. And it was there for years. It was there for like 20, 30 years before they took the thing down. Time is the meeting of two boulders in the night. And I never even understood why I wrote that. And yet, this research I've been doing, this report on quantum, makes me understand what I wrote. And this is where we get back to where musicians are coming up with these things that no one else is even realizing. To us, they are proofs. Like when I do Taliban Buddhist and I've got 4 people doing exactly what I want without writing it down, where there's no tuning system. So the notes are all being pulled from the ether. And ether is akasha. That's the closest term we have in English to it. I have 4 pages of notes, and I'm like trying to drop in and out. Like, color is the frequency of light as photons in a delivery system. Kind of a different way to see color.
Chris does have his hand raised, if you want to digress for a minute.
Chris?
Yeah, I don't know how unique my experience is, but through high school, I was on a science prep, and then I ended up taking a detour, becoming classical guitar major, getting an associate's degree in that, then going back and getting a bachelor's degree in chemistry. So my observation is that throughout the curriculum for the chemistry degree, there was no necessity to take anything with the humanities. When I was a classical guitar major and I took the humanities and saw the architecture, the painting, the poetry, the music in humanities, going from uh, Paleolithic up to the modern times, it was tremendously mind-bending and opening. I didn't realize all that was there. And so I would go back to, especially here in America, our culture of not well rounding out people's education is at fault for this going to 12 equal.
And you know, this is also what makes philosophers separate from chemists, separate from physicists, separate from musicians, separate. So, you know, Einstein basically said creativity and imagination is more important than knowledge. And if some of the knowledge we learned was wrong, you know, like I have to be honest, Chris, I just tuned out, I should say. Just as you said, mind bending, and made me think it's a quantum term. I tuned out as a microtonal musical term to chemistry because I thought these orbits of the electrons just seemed ridiculous to me. But you know, now we just know that the electrons are just moving in the direction that is the closest. They're making, you know, rapid decisions, and they have these incredible experiments of these slits where they take a beam of light and they put it in photon quantized form, and they do something where the classical physics expectation is one thing, but the quantum result is something else.
Yeah, you're
Double slit.
Yeah.
the double slit experiment, and they've done it with light, electrons, atoms, and even some molecules,
Yeah.
which is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
But it's not the way I understand quantum physics. You can't it's our understanding that saying that it's a wave, a probability cloud, it's a particle. It's a different animal than that. That's very, I don't think anybody, you know, Richard, I think you quoted Richard Feynman earlier that, you know, and also Niels Bohr about the difficulty in trying to understand quantum mechanics and the implications of it, because it's brings you to what would be in normal everyday life absurd conclusions, such as like quantum tunneling. And part of our biological functions require for there be a quantum tunneling of an electron in order to work. I can't remember exactly. I don't think it's a Krebs cycle, but it might be that. But basically, biology co-ops the quantum tunneling effect in order for us to live.
Yeah, we are going to continue to learn in the classical physics way, and we're going to have to find ways to coordinate our knowledge of quantum with our senses.
We have to reboot the terminology, I think, because there's so many assumptions in our language that are leading us down to ask the wrong questions.
Can I say I think education is slow, but I took chemistry in the late 90s, or no, I'm sorry, in the late 80s. And the idea of orbitals was already existing then when I took it.
Yeah.
So I think quantum, and now I think high school chemistry and physics classes are maybe putting more emphasis on quantum, because there's been a lot of development in the last 40, 50 years.
I'm in no position to know if it's changed, but I want to get back to Chris's thing, because what I got out of this, when I saw the split, you know, on 3 splits, and then I saw the phase. So the phase is the movement of the particles, the quantized particles, that they do a kind of, you can map them, and they kind of do like a curly Q, and they have a shape. And then I thought, that's the equivalent. Now, this is metaphor. This I'm sure of.
Okay.
that's the equivalent of a phrase. So musicians phrase by somehow putting a personal stamp on the equation so that it has its independence. One thing I noticed that I was really interested in is Fagin argued for free will. And he was saying there's free will within even the cells of the wave. And yet I have a good friend who wrote this book, Determined, Robert Sapolsky, who wrote that there is no free will. And I've seen him now on videos with Tyson, with other physicists, and you know, every one of them backs down to Sapolsky. Fagin says, though, what did they, he actually talks about Sapolsky without naming him. He goes, let me ask you, what did these people who talk about no free will, what did they get from that? What did they gain? So he's trying to say, don't bring that up. But he's also bringing up whether there's a time that we'll be ready to engage these concepts. And maybe it's not yet. And maybe he even suggested it's about power tripping, about people holding on to their domains of power, and or how to make sales out of it, you know, at some future point, you know, as a motivation. So, you know, these are.
I think they're all missing something.
Yeah.
They're all missing something. The fundamental question is who the hell or what the hell is it that presumably has the free will? You can't talk about free will unless you're talking about an entity that has it. And is that a soul or is that, and as soon as you start getting into words like that, ooh, slippery slope, you know,
Right.
because these are non-definables and they just kind of assume that everybody knows what that is.
And it could be in different languages.
And they're asking the wrong questions because they haven't answered the most fundamental ones.
But doesn't the Earth have free will? Like Chernobyl, it destroys it, but the Earth comes back without any help.
Yeah, well, that's the consciousness part of it.
Well, you have to answer that before you can really get into the free will.
Fagin's
And again, by the way,
answer.
that's the role of philosophers, is to keep scientists and even artists honest by asking ugly questions all along and examining thought itself. That's what scientists don't tend to do.
So
is examine the
Fagin's.
laws of thought itself.
I want you to know Fagin's answer. He
Okay.
has an answer for you. Because I did listen to the whole thing. So the answer is give him 20 years.
Okay.
He is ready to prove everything.
All right.
He says it's just a matter of time.
Hunting.
It's what we've done for every other physicist. Give him a break. He did invent the CPU and he never even claims that. He never brings it up.
That's a safe one.
He basically says, you know, you give me 20 years, I will prove all of these things. So John, I don't know what to say about that, but you know, he's going to go about doing the best to convince everybody, and he has no real reason to. He doesn't seem to have the reason to have power, or the reason to make money, or the reason to prove anything to anybody, or you know what I mean? He basically looks like just a person doing his best.
But he didn't develop the CPU in a vacuum. That may be what he's saying.
Yeah.
He developed it with help of other people, but he authored it. So that
So
could be it.
His name is pronounced Fagin, by the way.
Fagin, thank you. Yeah, this is
Fagin.
always my problem. This is why I try to say languages are different. All right, thank you. So
He's been mentioned so many times, I thought I would put that correction in there.
I don't know my Italian, you know, and he would love to talk about all the Italian innovators in this that I had never heard of, because different countries are focusing on different. And let me just say on the out, China is 10 times more advanced on quantum computers than the United States, but the Chinese people don't know about it. Let's just put that in the mix. So at this point, and I do have other things I could show you, but I think the best thing is to hear some music. And what I chose for today is, I hope that's okay, Michael, time was, but what I hope for today is a piece called It's by Don Conroe. It's called The Gong Elegy, author unknown. There's actually an author of the words I found out from 1934, a woman, Carrie something, who these words were used for funerals. And it kind of happened all of a sudden where I was pulled out of the audience as a traveler. And the whole thing starts to have these quantum connections where you have two conchs play, two shells play, a flute versus a cello, two different kinds of vocals, tenor and baritone. And then me with a bassoon, totally not knowing what I'm doing. I had no idea what I was doing. I was like a particle drawn in from a wave, incorporated or organically interspersed, however you want to put it, with the piece. Any questions before Michael plays it? Any question about why I might pick this? Maybe you'll have less even of that question if you have any at the end. It's about 27 minutes. I hope you can stay. And if not, come back to it. And I'm kind of pleased. I only found it 2 weeks ago. And I had a great talk with Don, who's now 90. And Don would be here today, if not that he was in China, in Shanghai, where he's doing a peace garden, where he has gotten this whole Chinese community to play gongs and take pieces of metal that were once used for weapons and put them in a garden.
Very cool.
And he's been doing that his whole life. He's done that at the United Nations. I participated with him doing it once in New Jersey on Christmas. He does these gong massages. Remember, it's a Kundalini yoga. And, whether you believe that the gong actually has any therapeutic value, to quote Michael, people love it. And it's spread all over the world, and it's in every country. I mean, he's going to be in Eastern Europe next. I mean, really pushing him at 90. And he's, it's tough to stay in touch with everything. Anyway, I just got it. I just found it. I don't know. What I'm doing is basically just trying to put something that makes sense for Don in the totality of what I'm experiencing. And I'll catch you all on the other end.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm still,
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
I can't believe it went uninterrupted full screen.
Well, I think the shaman was in action at the moment. You
I
know.
think so. I mean, what other explanation do we have? Right? It interrupted me when I had Fajin.
It was a quantum envelope.
But do you know, even now, listening to it again, it's so quantum in what he's doing. I mean, he's trying to. You know, first of all, I thought what I was doing at the end, and I'm analyzing it now, and it's like 40 years ago, is doing random numbers. I was trying not to play the same note twice ever without even thinking about it.
Was that mostly improvised with everybody? Or
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
Yeah.
that's all improvised as far as first of all, I never rehearsed ever. I had
Mm.
no idea what he was going to do. I barely knew I was going to be involved.
So
He
there
just-
was a kind of an improvised storyline as well. There was one spot where you walked past the mic and kind of into the audience, and he came and got you,
Yeah.
like you needed a retrial or something.
Yeah, I was wondering whether you would have called that conduction.
Well, it kind of was.
Well, it definitely
that
was.
that came to mind. That did come to mind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too.
But hands-on
No, it's
shamanic.
very ritualistic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
At the time, I remember feeling he sounded hokey. You know, I'll be honest. I thought, you know, it just seemed a little bit hokey, you know. But you know, looking at it now is what was called for.
For me, it felt like the genesis of why we do music. I mean, how music begins. You know,
Yeah.
in all cultures,
Primal.
it's just this way. You could have been, you know, creating a new culture, a new civilization just then.
Now, remember, we were talking about photons. For sound, it's phonons. And, you know, we never used that term, phonons. I don't think I've ever used it before. But, you know, you can hear the sound going in every direction, just like electrons in a wave field. And the ear of an audience member would be the closest direction for the photons to reach multiple times simultaneously. So, you know, it's just, to me, you know, even what he's talking about and what he says, when you can pick out the words, and you kind of have to turn up the volume for it because, you know, that's the way the recording was made, you know, unless somebody learns to change that. But I also want to talk about the tunneling, if you're talking about like wormholes. So, a possible explanation, and again, it could be metaphoric, but again, it could be like Fajin said, give me 20 years and I'll prove it. If you have quantized movement in the harmonic series, and I say if because we just established we do, then the ephemera, the difference tones, the bouncing off of shining objects, which sound could possibly do as well as light, all of that ephemera is probably the wormhole equivalent to the quantization of the harmonic series. So like you get to a certain point and you can go through to a different place unexpected, which in itself could go into another place unexpected.
Well, yeah, that's the shamanic experience right there.
Yeah, that's also true. That's also true. I mean, it's nice to see like all of these things happening. Another way to envision that qubit idea is to think of a balloon, a round balloon, where every point on the balloon is a direction. And so with the qubit idea, you're able to explore the universe in that sense. Now, it's part of reality and not part of reality only because of our senses. So it's kind of neat that it's almost like composition. an astrophysicist or a quantum, mechanic fellow writes down, some kind of equation, and then it's like a composition. Like looking at it from their point of view, they're making a composition. They're going to now hear what happened with the composition. It makes sense to them because there's an equal sign, right? So then they can see if it's going to make sense. And with a fellow named Albert Einstein, it turns out it made sense a lot of the time. And for other people, it didn't have to make sense that often, maybe once or twice, enough for a Nobel Award. And so when you ask what is quantum, it's really this holistic sense I'm trying to bring to you. At least that's my view of what it is this, it could include people who don't agree with you, but it has to be represented as this very big connection that really does come down to I'm one with the universe. With the idea that we're made up of all the chemistry that the universe has, and so I do have more respect for chemistry than I used to. I have more respect for every field than I used to. And that's when you realize there are no lines to be drawn. The lines that are drawn are all social constructs. How about that? Would you agree with that? I just made that up.
Well, I think another way to look at it is through it's always interesting to look through the Carlos Castaneda lens. And he talks about the tonal and the nagual. And the tonal is what's on the table and can be talked about. And that includes God, because it's something that can be talked about and described and given attributes. The nagual is the more mysterious underside of the table that's not quantifiable. It's not describable. Words collapse and dissolve. That's more in terms of our pursuits. It's the practice of music, not the theory. It's the actual experience of what happens. It's very, very hard to describe when it's such a multilinear form of information transfer and absorption. So I would look at it more that way, as like all the things that could be described, which is where scientists live. We live as much under the table as we do above it. And I think that's reflected in the fact that when brain scans of people playing or writing music light up the whole brain, it's no longer a left and right thing. It's going back and forth, and all of this stuff is going on. And I think it's reflective of that kind of oneness.
Remember we used to learn about left and right brain, and then physiognomy told us, wait a second, it's not really in one hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
But then I would, do it one greater and say, but it still feels like two modalities. So like, even if left brain really wasn't in the location of the left, it still constituted for me melody, because it still constituted linear movement. And then the right brain was always in contrast to it.
At the same time.
At the same time.
Yeah, they're both true.
Right. So, it's one thing to say we don't know physically, though now with MRIs and things like that, we do. But it's still incredibly dispersed.
Yeah.
And again, that's what the music was giving for me. I mean, you'd have to like turn it up a little bit next time, but you could hear. I'm so glad everybody's got a recording of it now. That worked. But, you could hear. And again, I don't have words for what you can hear, but you can experience. If you're open to it, if you're aware of the possibilities, you're in that great St. Paul's Chapel at Columbia University with the greatest acoustics on the planet, Barbara Streisand approved, right? And, they give it to us, right? The Reverend gives it to us for many years, for 2 decades. And Don knows how to play it. He knows how to move around in it, get the sounds and make an effect. And his general narrative, even with lyrics, is still not really words. He could have put that in another language and it would have worked just fine. You know, maybe that's me. Maybe it's because I don't listen to words that much anyway. But, you know, that could be a personal difference. And there's going to be a lot of personal differences. We all hear differently. So I just think that to say that there is no quantum reality to what we've already been doing as musicians is the problem. I don't think that's true. And, you know, we really are, maybe more so than some musicians, but I bet almost all musicians, even in pop, would say they want to be true. Right?
I want to be myself. I could care less.
True to yourself.
Well, just whatever. Just be
Still
in the
true.
moment.
It's still true. True to yourself.
Well, it's still true, but
But
really
it's
just
not about beauty, which is what we were reading in that big article.
right.
And right now there aren't that many articles, which means that future, ignoring all other futures right now, is still possible. So I hope you all enjoyed today. It was thought-provoking and may, you know, have some valuable input, if not influence, in a positive way.
Yeah, it was very good. A lot of food for thought, for sure.
And I had no idea what I was going to say.
Yeah.
All the better.
I didn't even sleep last night. There were people making music till 3 a.m. So I'm going to blame music for that. That's the way the world works, right? That's the way most people would do it. I don't want to hear anybody make any music now because I was kept awake last night. It just made it more likely not to go into a linear. First, we're going to talk about this with quantum tuning. Look, I said quantum tuning as if that was a thing. If quantum tuning is anything, it's everything that's not a tuning.
Yeah.
Which is why I would say music was microtonal that was not in a tuning system. Which is why all the definitions of tuning that you keep hearing over and over ad nauseum on the internet keep going over the same, you know, material, saying the same things over and over again. You know, but whenever they do it, they fall on the same traps, you know, and they think that, you know, has to be a system. And then what's the relationship of sound outside of system? Is it
Life?
Well, life, but it might actually be a draw of the harmonic force. Is there an influence? Might be. Certainly in the resonance of things around you. So, what do you guys think of his gong playing? Did that
Fantastic.
sound?
Fantastic. All the twirling and
I liked
fa-
it.
the phasing he was getting by kind of
Yeah,
wiggling.
the shifting of the
Very cool.
And
It
there you
was
go
unbelievable.
with phase and phrase again. You see, you were
Yeah.
able to use now the phase word, which is what they use for the shape that a photon takes when it goes through one of those slits. It goes in a different direction to get through the slit. So it's going to have a different phase. So, but he's using the gong for phasing, you know, by the way he moves the gong,
Yeah.
which is
very
phasing.
strong.
I was there. I saw that performance, and
Oh, that's right. You were there?
it was just unbelievable inside the chapel there. The way it
Wow.
sounded.
Wow, that's cool.
Big
I mean, you
wash.
don't get watching it on YouTube. You don't get the full effect of
I was
being there
wondering.
in 3
Yeah.
dimensions.
Nor do you, Joe, as the effect of being in it as a player.
Yeah.
That's true. This is true.
And yet, both of us might still not be the full picture,
Right.
right? So much of the full picture is ineffable in Don's head,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and how much influence came from.
This opens up a whole subject that we can get into another time, but yeah.
Yeah.
I was just to say to John, I was talking with Kaz the other day, because I tried to get him here. And Kaz is a mutual friend of ours who's a scientist. And what he does famously is convert science into metaphor. And he was telling me about two people I'd never heard of before that were experts in metaphor. And he really wants me to go into metaphor as a thing. And because nobody else does, he feels that, nobody understands what he's doing. So I wanted to say to him that if you focus on 12 equal and quantum, you are using, the wrong measurements. And you're coming up with the wrong answers. And, it's a mistake. It's an error that microtonal musicians don't make. And he went, wow, that just blew everything outside of the box. And it's funny, I guess everybody here knows Schrodinger's cat. That's what I was thinking about when he said box. So now this is bigger than even the box itself. Forget about whether the cat is alive or not. This is bigger than that. The whole table could be in an eruption, throwing the box into the air, influencing the whole thing because of a volcano that just happened to go off. So anyway, it's not outside of the box. It is the box itself, because you have to measure quantum reality with sound reality. And maybe sound reality is its own thing, which is what happens to sound, how it's shaped, sometimes by an ego, sometimes by a formula, but it's also shaped by the venue. It's shaped by all the knowledge you took to it, the consciousness that you had, that you took to it, so that you can then hopefully not be distracted by having a cold, or by having to leave early. I mean, how many of you felt that thinking that the video we just saw might have a commercial could happen at any time?
I wasn't thinking that at all.
You did, Stephen?
Yeah, I did, because that last one had that happen. And
And
I
there's
was thinking,
Schrodinger's
gee,
cat.
that would be really unfortunate if that were the case,
But that's Schrodinger's cat right there.
Yeah, it's both.
We don't know.
Yeah.
And it could be we think it's one or we think it's the other, and both are true at that moment.
Yeah.
But I also, thinking like you, Stephen, I felt, that it added to my awareness of what I was watching.
Mhm. Don't break the spell. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't break the spell. But more than that, though, taking the idea that the experience was so valuable for it not happening yet, I paid more attention.
Mhm.
And I even did it without making it louder on purpose, since I've heard it before. So, and these are like very individual decisions that we all make that just change the parameters completely. So there are no formulas to put into a linear equation. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I got out of it. I know I'm going to keep learning from it. I mean, I'll have insights. Doesn't seem like the best thing I can see for the quantum computer is different forms of receivers, like speakers, like different sound particles involved, different phonons that are integrated, which may or may not sound good to us, but that's taste. And I really want to underline that. And I didn't realize it right away, but so much of what the scientists say, present company excluded, is about taste. And that's not even a category they bring up. They don't look for taste as a category.
Aesthetics, maybe? Is that what you mean by taste?
Well, I added the word aesthetics today when I said that the Thuringian people weren't ready for equal temperament for music because they did not have the taste for it. And that might be a good way to use it. But But most of the time, tastes are very personal and easy to argue against. You know, just not a proof. Right? Taste is something we evolve with. Right? We don't have the same taste we used to. Though when we say the good old days, we're just remembering when we were young. Things tasted different. When you ate vegetables at the age of 5, it's not the same as now. I certainly didn't feel about salad the way I do now. That's just me. Jose, you're giving yourself away. So
I didn't like avocados as a kid. I like them now.
I love avocado. I live every day almost avocado. Though I get small ones because I don't want to overdo it. You know, it becomes phosphorus if you have kidney issues. So you don't want to like spend too much time on them. But you know, did quantum influence anybody today in music? I don't know. But it influences us as people.
Well, you know, the one thing I put in the chat though is one thing they're probably going to try to do, or Lucier, they took his cerebral organoids and created AI music from it. So what they're probably going to do is have holograms of like the Rolling Stones in the future and no real music. It's all going to be BS if we don't watch it. But I believe once that happens, real music will come back.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm not into real music because that to me involves taste.
I'm talking about us. I'm talking about
I know,
real
but even
musicians
then,
making music.
I'm going to avoid one being real and not.
Well,
But
one is going to be fake.
again, I'm going to avoid that. It doesn't mean you don't have a point, but
It's fake food.
it's fake facts.
There we go. So you
Okay.
can have fake sound, fake music, right?
Is there fake truth?
Yeah. Look at the U.S. government.
I don't think that's truth, though. So therefore, it can't be fake truth.
Said fake.
It's the real.
No,
it's
it's
the
either
real-
truth or it's not truth. It can't be fake truth. See, this is the thing about words. I have a new book coming out. I'm writing it, and it's 6 essays, and the last essay is multiple frames of mind, which is about multiple intelligences, and it's called a minority report music, because nobody does music exclusively. So I thought I would be the one, and I published it in Russia. So now I've rewritten it, you know, modernizing it, and I'm just connecting it to all kinds of things I would never have connected it to. But, you know, musical intelligence is a different way of breaking down categories, because we have all the different intelligences, but in different priorities. And then, you know, higher priority intelligences inform the others, so they all rise up. All the intelligences eventually develop further, get better. And, you know, the scientists don't necessarily have the musical intelligence. And yet we talk about things like we're all in agreement. So for us to be so easily in agreement, and for them to not even contemplate the existence of this agreement, is the real issue.
But could that be a conscious thing by the elites for centuries to ignore the power of sound?
A lot of it is psychology. Joe and I, we got on Zoom early today, and I mentioned that to him, that, you know, in the final analysis, it always comes down to psychology. Power tripping, being snobbish, holding on to your power. Fagin specifically mentions power as a reason why there's less interest in this in the science world.
And I think that connects with what Michael's concern about things in the future going a certain way. Because powers, as we know, and we see this disparity between classes, that power is in the hands of very, very, very few people right now.
Yeah.
And so that's what we have to contend with.
All right,
Yeah,
so we'll have to have a session next year on the music of politics.
I wanted to mention that, Fagin, when he speaks about power, it was very close to his life because he invented the Intel 4040 or 4004. That was the very first microprocessor. And there was a tremendous amount of competition at that time. This was, I think, 1971 when he invented it. There's a huge amount of competition among physicists and manufacturers and just a whole bunch of different things, really different things, all competing to be the first one to do this. And he was the one who did it. And there's a whole big story about, I'm not even going to get into it, about what became what is now Intel. And it was all power politics. That's what it all was. Yeah.
I was stunned, though, to see that Eduardo's book is $220. When you have something, like you're introducing for the first time in history, and your real interest is to get it out there.
Yeah. It's
why
not
would you do
surprising
that?
to me. It's the intellectual wall, and talking about power, that's another way that they maintain it.
Well, that's academia.
Yeah.
That's the category I would put that in, where they think it's okay to do that, because then the libraries have all the books, and you have to belong to the university and connect to them, and it's holding the. I long ago realized that the conservatories of music were called conservatories because they were conservative. They were conserving, but they were conservative in how they conserved and what they included. Right? It's like in France, Louvre, the great Louvre Museum wouldn't have any Monet. Monet had to have, they have to be a separate Musée d'Orange to have to see Monet, which was fantastic to go there. But why not in the Louvre? You don't think he's worthy? Right? So, I just wish that the scientists would not use errors, saying Pythagoras invented this and Vincenzo Galilei invents equal temperament. And, it's just, they really don't know what they're saying. So when they say that there's an A sharp and a C on a string, they don't realize that that one note is really a timbral conglomerate of harmonics, and they may not even be pure harmonics. Like in certain ranges, they notes get stretched in different directions. And then you have the inharmonics. I remember arguing with a musicologist of repute. They never heard of the word inharmonic and thought I was inventing the word.
They never heard the word inharmonic.
No,
They weren't musicians.
They were musicologists. No, they weren't musicians. They may play piano.
I first heard it from Irv Wilson,
Inharmonic?
and I had studied music already a couple of years, and I hadn't
But
heard it then.
inharmonics are in 12th tone.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's true. You're right.
Yeah, it's in 12 tone with.
But I guess what I mean is, like, I learned about its Greek definition,
Right.
which is different.
No, that's different. Greek is not inharmonic. Greek is enharmonic.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm hearing N.
As opposed
I'm
to
sorry.
I.
I'm hearing
But
N.
let's be very specific here. And the reason I brought up that whole thing about multiple intelligences with the music thing, I forgot to give you the reason. It's because I was using English, writing in Russia, and I was using words, and this is not musical intelligence. No words are musical intelligence. That's a verbal intelligence, which people have in different levels. We started with that today. So, okay, so enharmonic meant it was in harmony. So that's why it sounds like in. But inharmonic means that, and this is like the first physics I think I ever really took in from music, is that when the vibrations don't go evenly through the mass, That's when you get inharmonicity. And that happens in metals. Every time you're dealing with metal, the pitch frequencies, the frequencies which are longitudinal, because there's different waveforms. I finally understood standing waves just yesterday. You know, I'm sure everybody here knows it but me, right? Anybody not know it? But you see, that's what I say. I admit I'm not a trained physicist. But you know what I think is really special is you can get the, I'm going to put it in really good words, like I said to Kaz, you can grasp the concept of the linear equations without having to do them. So you can understand this while all these, remember I read those quotes by Niels Bohr and Feynman and Wheeler. They were all saying you don't understand it. You can't understand it. So today, anything I say, the physicists come up right away and say, you don't know this, I don't know this. They're very proud of not knowing everything. How hard it is, how weird it is. And that's our reality.
Or it could be a way to keep the information out of the public so they can develop it without influence for control.
So to that end, Michael, I saw an AI presentation of a so-called last interview with Albert Einstein, and it was so good I almost believed it was true. And it was all about how there's no death, you know, because it's the year before he died, and there was a conspiracy by the government to keep it secret because people couldn't handle his views on death because they would be conflicting with all religious views. And they would have to wait, and that in a recent discovery, they could put this together. And it was, like I say, it was very convincing. It was only, you know, reading all the comments, and there were so many comments because it was so powerful. The AI, using what it knows of Einstein, could predict that this would be a possible conversation.
And we're just at the beginning of it.
Yeah.
So we're going to be able to take entire libraries and say, let's have Schopenhauer have a conversation with Wittgenstein about, you know, and it will be accurate. It will be relatively accurate.
Right.
Based
And
on
they're doing that with Chopin. So if they can do it with Chopin, they can do it with Schopenhauer.
Yeah.
What is it for? To rewrite history and control people. It's not
Control us more. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
Because it's going to be the big bucks that are going to be able to do that.
Yeah, but the other side of the coin, and this is 1-0, they both happen at the same time, they both equal the same coin. If you cure cancer, that is manipulating the population.
Same people giving us cancer are the ones curing it. I smell it.
All right, now we have a jury coming in.
That sounds like the pharmaceutical companies. They create the disease and cure it, you know?
There you go.
Well, look, in full declaration, I used to work for Pfizer for many years. So I have, among my many careers, I have an insight into them that you would be surprised about. Because I would have to, sometimes I did database work where I'd have to sign these things that I'm not allowed to tell anybody what I'm reading. So like I know all the examples of the people who reacted badly to a drug. And there's some really incredible ones. And there aren't many, but there's like this percentage that people are going to die. People are going to suffer. People are going to have, problems. When Zoloft came out, there were some really strong examples, an antidepressant. And they wanted me to write music for the commercials for Zoloft. And it's not the first time or the last that I turned people down who wanted to make money off me for this. Because I didn't want to create what was the perception of a microtonally sad, depressed music that they can then say represents Zoloft, where they get cleaned up into something, quote, beautiful.
And 12
it's
equal.
the same problem.
Yeah, 12 equal.
Yes, I remember being in the office of the product manager of Zoloft. He was a good friend of mine. He's a nice guy. I used to sit right across from him when I was taking phone calls for the president of Pfizer. So I was really in there at various times. I'm still in touch with the medical doctor who introduced me to consilience that Stephen and I talk about a lot. He's going to read the next book. He just wants me to sign it for him. But it's nice that these Pfizer people still, very few, because they threw everybody out and they brought in a whole bunch of new people. So it's not even the same company as when I was there. So there's all these added, different ways to talk about it. But, I thought I should tell you. My piece Atlantis for Shells, which Don Conroe played in, I wrote that at Pfizer. They paid me to write that piece.
That's cool. That's cool.
And they let me do stuff like that. They were really good about that.
That's super cool.
Most of them.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of Atlantis, I just recently read that the Mediterranean was filled in a massive flood, an unprecedented flood. It used to be a dry land base.
There's another continent underneath it.
Yeah. And so what I was wondering is, could that have been the source of the myth of Atlantis?
Atlantis may have been like a repeated thing. It may also be around the Canary Islands. It may also be in a part of Africa that had water that had an island inside the water. So when the water just dried out, the whole thing is gone and it's just desert. But, I started off with Atlantis thinking it was in Santorini in Greece because a lot of people believed that there. Atlantis used to be a round country, and so did Santorini, of which, the earthquakes bring up these other islands. It's a very interesting place. Everybody left the islands this year because of multiple repeated earthquakes, something that's happening in Texas, I believe. But, there's weird stuff going on. But so Atlantis is really just Plato's story. So, you can read the story of it in Plato. I once read it for a 5th grade class. They loved it. Here I am reading about Atlantis in the only real location where it's, officially written about. They loved it. So, it's amazing you can't do that in a school more often. I do it as a substitute teacher. But so Atlantis is great for stories, metaphors. It really, from an ethnic thing, DNA thing, there's a people that people today don't have a consciousness of called the Pelasgians. Any of you here know who they are? Joe, you do?
They lived in what is now Russia.
No.
I know that.
No, that's the Pechenegs.
No, I'm thinking the Pelasgians.
No, Pelasgians are Greece and southern Italy.
Oh, okay.
And maybe even Berber. So they're the oldest people of that area.
Is that the group that were known for pitching eggs?
For who?
You said pitching eggs. Were they known for pitching eggs?
No. The Pecheneg is another group. That's like Moldavia. No, the Pelasgians are the original people of Athens. The Pelasgians are sailors, like the Phoenicians become. They are, I think they're the slaves, the first slaves of the Greeks. So when the Greeks come in, they have to capture the Pelasgian cities, and then they imprison them, and they enslave them. So Athens was their capital. So Pelasgians are the Greeks, really, if you call them Greeks, that fought and won against the Atlanteans, according to the Egyptians who told the story to Plato's uncle. I hope I answered your question.
There have been others. There's been others who's researched, extensively the Atlantean hypothesis. Manly P. Hall, I think, wrote a 4-volume book or something on. He makes a case for all these that it could be located.
But it becomes like Boxwell tempered clavier.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a cottage industry
Yeah.
where everyone's speculating, and if we go by the Bach industry, everyone's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And but they're only
true
wrong
for a lot of subjects.
They're only wrong though on a what's that word again?
No,
A spectrum. Spectrum.
Thank you. On a I should just remember it as my internet company, really. But
how about Billy Cobham's album Spectrum?
Spectrum, love that album.
Oh, that's a phenomenal album.
I love that album.
So I guess we've reached the end today. Thank you all for joining me on my journey. Next week, we'll have a lot of fun. I know Bill Setharis is going to be with us. And if you don't know Bill, that's going to be interesting by itself. But then you'll have other people here like Sevish and Stephen Weigel and
great.
And even Subrach Singh.
Nice.
Great. Fantastic.
So
awesome.
Yeah. So catch you all later.
All right,
yeah, thank
thanks,
you, Johnny.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all.